Okay, to continue then, this picture is actually a image of Set spearing or subduing the supernatural entity Apophis. It's a little bit fragmentary. I'm sure this is the drawing version of it first. That's been reconstructed because there was actually a doorway struck through there. It's from the Persian period. It might not strike you, obviously, if you know anything about the mythology of Set, as being an obvious image of Set, because falcon head for a start. But the hieroglyphic caption in the to one corner says quite clearly that this is Set. And the falcon, as an image of royal prestige, can represent Horus, or it can also, in some instances, represent Set. So it's shown with the wings, very Persian style, the falcon body, riding, or next to a lion, which is another very ancient image of royal prestige and power, which are often found together, spearing the entity Apophis. And this image I find particularly interesting as well, because it's the origin of the mythology of St. George and the dragon. Obviously, myths of serpents and dragons, which is another version of it, being subdued and occur from cultures all over the world, which links them together in lots of ways. But in Britain, where I come from, or specifically England, the patron saint is St. George, who's an Eastern saint. It's quite rather unusual that he should be venerated as our national saint, but there you go, he is. And it shows you as well, I think, how we are connected still in the West and in the modern world to so much from Egypt and from the ancient past in surprising ways, really. And you can see the sequence. This image, I should say, is from the Oasis, Ibis Oasis. There's an image of the little temple from a distance, and it's sometimes said that the cult of Set lingers longer in the Oasis, kind of outside of the main drag in a way, in areas that are kind of a little bit kind of doing their own thing, which assumes that as well that the cult of Set even went through this decline, and that's a whole another issue. Maybe we'll talk about that another day. It used to always be thought, it's a commonplace of this material that people say Set went through this decline. But recent studies, people have kind of modified that quite a lot now, and it's probably not seen as quite as simple as that. But certainly there are notable examples of the cult of Set and iconography from the Oasis areas. There's the same image that's been recoloured to get some idea of what the original might have looked like by one of the archaeologists who was working on the site, happened to be an artist as well. You see, rather beautiful, or I don't know, I think it's beautiful. You might find it rather garish, but anyway, that's a very unusual image of Set. And if you compare it with this image, which is taken from a Coptic church, in fact, so it's a piece of Coptic church is often built inside Egyptian buildings, but this is actually Coptic mythology. It shows a Horus figure on a horse this time, because we're talking about, later in the timeline where horses are much more common for individual people riding them. So he's a kind of wearing Roman armour, so a kind of military saint, like St. George, very like, he's not, common type of saint within Egypt, and spearing or subduing what is a crocodile, really, but another what you would call a Typhonian animal, crocodile, dragon. This image from the Louvre could easily be the part of the timeline for the development of the iconography of St. George and the dragon, because St. George is very popular. Egyptian Coptic saint. Another image, which is one of my favourites, or this is a kind of montage really of material. The top one shows the famous thing of that I described earlier of the Apophis snake, which there you can see all its multiple coils and everything, gives you some idea of it being enormous, rising up before the bolt of Ra in the underworld and being subdued and speared by Set. And that is an image from a beautiful mythological papyrus, a small one, but I think most Egyptian people, even the high status ones who were lucky enough to get a tomb or a coffin, which probably most people didn't get that level of stuff, but even there, people didn't read. The percentage of people who could read these very complex books were probably small, maybe a few percentage of the population. So that's why one of the reasons why they like pictures so much, because they have picture books. Essentially, some of the papyrus equivalents of the Book of the Dead has very nice pictures in it anyway, which tell the story. And some papyrus, some versions of the Book of the Dead, in effect, have very, very little text, or perhaps no text at all. It's all done with pictures. Just say maybe 5 or 6 key images or scenes that one has to know about, understand and encounter after death. And one of the first things that the dead will have to encounter or have to understand is the fact that Set, the god Set, is there for them, protecting the sun and by association protecting them from dissolution and chaos in the underworld. And so that's a source of strength, I suppose, to remember that and to kind of remind the divine realm that that's part of the bargain. There it is again, a bit close up, sketched out. Sometimes when things are drawn, you see more details. Very beautiful image of of the sunbolt being towed through the underworld by these jackal-like figures and also these serpent figures, which those serpents, not all serpents are bad serpents within this mythology. Some are good and some are bad. But one in particular, Apophis, is huge and particularly dangerous, the serpent of non-being. And underneath that, is obviously these are difficult to photograph now, is an image, the image itself really, the way it actually looks, if you can gather that. The drawing, and on the right hand side you have the owner of the papyrus, who's a lady who has a cone, a small glowing cone on top of her head, which sort of indicates that's her in the underworld really, dressed in white, and observing these different mythological scenes that are going to carry her through to immortality after death. I progressed it a little bit further. You can see it's like a cartoon strip. She's moved on. There's another image of the Apophis snake being speared, being knifed, if you like. So there's obviously a big thing you have to watch. She watches this image of Kepra rising at sunlight and worshipping various gods, the god Amu there. So you see her in various streams, and there's very little text in that book. She just has to have the pictures, which is just as well, works for us as well. Another possibility, this is a very old artifact. I mentioned flint, nap flint knives. This is one of the famous so-called fishtail knives or fishtail lances that they've made of flint, nap flint, from the very, very old pre-dynastic period even. And we may be able to connect those, because those images occur in association with the god Set. And there is a theory, which is quite an interesting one, that one of the meanings of Apophis, this serpent snake, is somehow connected with the umbilical cord. And if you think the umbilical cord and the severing in the umbilical cord is kind of connected with these ideas about birth, or dangers of the moment of birth, which again, of course, the sun is born at dawn, when we're reborn, or born for the first time, there's a moment of danger, one way or another. So the knife used to sever the, which is what this is, special ritual knife used to sever the cord of the newborn baby. Again, we're bringing in together all of these different magical and symbolic pieces of material. I wanted to talk the serpent Apophis. I suppose through this we're glimpsing very, very deep mythology, very, very old mythology, from before the historical period, really. But we can find that the same kind of myths occur in lots of related cultures, in Mesopotamian culture, in Indian culture, in Egyptian culture, in Greek culture, probably loads of others. It shows a strata of connected belief, one way or another, at a deep level, and that's another very interesting issue to explore. Whether there was actually one of the issues that I kind of wrestled with is whether there was actually a cult, a temple, if you like, of some of these gods, because you have this idea that very, very old gods may have not have been thought of as, they might have been okay, for people worshipped them in the Stone Ages or whatever, and they didn't see them quite as badly as we do. Or maybe the nature of religion at that time was different. That these were powerful, scary things that you had to think about, you had to make offerings to, but maybe you didn't exactly love them, in one way or another. They were forces of nature. They are the chaos demons, and you have to come to terms with them, and one way or another learn how to control them or live with them. So in the Indian tradition, you have the colossal serpent Vritra, who's also known from Persian myth, being subdued by Indra. So that's a Vedic version of Apophis. In the Talmud, you have Leviathan, which is a colossal dragon or serpent, essentially the same sort of entity that exists from primordial times. In Mesopotamian myth, you have Tiamat, again, and a whole sequence of myths to do and rituals in Babylon and other places to do with how to deal with this chaotic force. Okay, so we can't get too far. It's quite interesting we need to know a little bit about the Egyptian timeline. We need to think about that. We see these in books all the time, but it's just this time. So Egyptian timeline, simply broken down, you've got the early dynastic. Obviously you've got the pre-dynastic, you've got prehistoric thing, but you've got the early dynastic when Egypt sort of comes together and starts forming the kind of kingdoms and doing the kind of things that we're familiar with. Then eventually this coalesces into one great kingdom throughout the whole of Egypt, which we call the Old Kingdom, and the dates are there. And this is a time when the pyramids were built and wonderful works of art were made, and many things that we associate and love about Egypt come into the world. And this goes on for several dynasties, the kind of families of kings and monarchs that carry on, and then everything falls apart. Something goes badly wrong. And that's called the first intermediate period, and it lasts for about 150 years. Eventually things come back together again. There are lots of theories about why this happened, and you have the Middle Kingdom, and then you have that carries on for several dynasties, and the same thing happens. There's the great humiliation, fragmentation of Egyptian culture, foreign intrusion, and those people I called the Hyksos earlier, the rulers of foreign lands who kind of come over and take over Egypt. And eventually, again, people learn from them, and they are eventually expelled. People fight with them, they're expelled, and you have the New Kingdom, which is the period there, and lots of very famous, probably Egypt's most famous king comes from the New Kingdom, and kings and queens. But I was thinking of Ramesses the second, subject of many a biblical epic, one way or another. And then eventually there's a third intermediate period when things kind of go into terminal decline, and other people take over. But the issue that we're really thinking about is that first breakdown, the societal breakdown of the first intermediate period. That is the period in which this colossal serpent Apophis first emerges in records, at the time the name is first even mentioned. There's lots of debate about that, but it wouldn't be ridiculous to suggest that maybe that's when the idea, when the god first appears, or when people really start focusing on that in times of when things are really, really bad. And certainly magic itself goes through a kind of, it's either invented in that period, or it certainly goes through this kind of renaissance because of the dangers. And so we're talking about real dangers, we're talking about sort of terrible things going on. The usual example is the Lamentations of Ipuwer. The plunderer is everywhere, and the servant takes whatever he finds. The Nile overflows, yet none bother ploughing the land. Everybody says we do not know what will happen throughout the land. The women are barren, and none can even concede, and the builders of pyramids have become cultivators. And those who were in the sacred bark are now yoked to it, enslaved. So the world is turned upside down, and servants become rulers. People, the worst things are even described of people with nothing to eat, and starvation, famine, people, cannibalism, eating of the dead, or all sorts of terrible things happen. And this is related to this time, to give you a flavour of how bad it is. And you also get quite sceptical literature as well written in this time, which I'm quite fond of because it's quite philosophical in its way. So you've got the dialogue of a man with his soul, where he's contemplating whether to kill himself, really, because things are so bad. So it's quite a depressing thing, and he's having this dialogue, this internal dialogue, to see whether it's worth going on or not. It's very human stuff, this. And the thing that I was very struck by was where he says, those who built in granite and constructed halls in good pyramids with very fine work, and when the builders became gods, their stelae, their symbols, were destroyed anyway, like the weary ones who died on the riverbanks through lack of a survivor. So those who built the pyramids, they didn't really do any better than the people who didn't even have a funeral, just died lying on the side of the river. Nobody did better, everybody's stuff. The occupant, he says, of the now ruined pyramid, they never returned. He did no better than those who died alone and didn't even have a funeral. That's what it says. It's a remarkable document so long ago. For someone to say those pyramids, the people who, all the promise of the pyramids, the technology and all the rest, it never worked out. They never came back. And they didn't really do any better than anybody else, couldn't afford all that stuff. It was kind of a waste of time. It's a remarkable thought, and still very relevant really when trying to understand that culture. And people speculate about the pyramids and all the powerful, wonderful things that they can do, which is undoubtedly true. But one of the things that they maybe never did, according to this document, was bring people back from the dead, or one way or another, which is probably what they were supposed to do in some sense. Well, certainly that aspect of the construction is hubris, isn't it? It never quite happened. Again, from the area of Luxor, there's the famous tomb there, the tomb of the soldiers, which recently been opened up, and these are kind of just mass graves really of soldiers of the area, near ancient Thebes or modern Luxor. And looking at the skeletons, and there's just lots and lots of them, that you can see quite clearly the evidence of the wounds that they suffered from the many battles and wars that were taking place at the time. It was just one warlord against another. So it's quite a gloomy, depressing, violent time really. So in this time, the ritual of Apophis is, even though our version of it is of a much later period, everybody seems to agree that the ritual and the techniques go back to this period. And the ritual is not some peripheral thing either. It's really important. It's performed every day, and perhaps several times a day in most of the temples when they were functioning properly. The thing that, to bring us back to what I said at the beginning, that I'm going to just briefly focus on for want of time, really, because it's a very rich subject, is the issue, the use in the ritual, which is specifically mentioned, of the wax doll or wax images to overcome a pep. This is where that technique comes from, especially wax, so that no remnant of the malign spirit, which is of a pep, this chaos demon, survives. So it's the book of overcoming a pep, which is, when I say book, it's actually several books. Quite a long ritual with lots of different things, but I'm looking at one thing. As I say, the ritual was performed in both temples in Thebes, so modern day Luxor, the southern temple, the temple that's in the centre of the city, and Karnak, which are connected to each other. So the ritual is performed in both of those objects in it, both of those temples, as the ritual says it's supposed to be. That's what and it more or less begins with a chapter, it's that chapter called the chapter of spitting upon a pep. So this is kind of the issues I was raising earlier, and you say the words as you're carrying out these actions: be you spat upon a pep, be you spat upon a pep, be you spat upon a pep, be you spat upon a pep. So it's quite sort of tense stuff really, and lots of repetitions. There's 4 times there. Tells you exactly how many times you have to repeat these things, and there's a lot of anger and animosity in this ritual. And to effect the destruction of a pep, you have to write some of this stuff on a strip of papyrus in green ink, and then recite the text. So you have the text on the papyrus, and you recite it over a figure of a pep made of wax, in which his name has also been written. So there's your technique. And the figure also at the end should be laid upon a fire, so that it's consumed. It consumes the enemies of Ra in the fire. And you might place that figure of a pep in a fire at daybreak or sunrise, which is a particular moment of danger for the sun god. And also the time which you know from that the other god I mentioned, Set, and the sun god Ra, are always together at that moment as well. And the enemy of Ra is overthrown in the thunderstorm, so there's a relation to the thunderstorm. The figure of Pep has been burnt in the fire. The fire should be made of a herb called bryony. So again, a magical herb there, quite commonly in use even now in contemporary magic. The remains should be, if there are any, if there's ashes or whatever, they should be soaked in wine and then thrust again into the fire, so doubly burned over. And when you put the figure of a Pep into the fire, you've got to spit upon it a great many times, and at the beginning of each hour of the day until the sun actually comes up. And you can also trample it in the dirt with your left foot, driving away the roarings, right? Because it tends to roar, howl, this demon, which is called Stinking Face. So this is quite primal stuff, really. And through all this sort of stuff, quite a long ritual, which is still quite usable in one way if one wants to do this sort of stuff. An interesting sideline to this is where Apophis as being a serpent demon is whether the goddess like Isis, who is a very powerful god connected with magic, how she might be involved. And I talked about fighting like with like, and how gods resemble the things, these chaos things, and because there is a kind of way of looking at this in which Isis is maybe even created the god Apep. I mean, we haven't really talked about the gender of Apep, and that's again a difficult issue. It seems to be of both genders in some ways, sometimes male, sometimes female, and that's again another common feature of these colossal serpent demons from the past. Their gender seems to be able to switch from one to another. And in the famous myth where Isis tries to extract the secret name of Ra, because knowing the secret name of Ra gives you kind of power over that particular entity, which is quite a lot of power given he's a sun god and the creator. She, in an act of, I suppose you would say, sexual magic, in which she takes some of her bodily fluids, the sweat basically from her body and the dirt from her body, and binds this together to make a kind of snake which she brings to life, and then she kind of lets the sun god step on the snake, so he gets a very powerful, painful snake bite, and offers to cure him if she'll tell him of her secret name. So that's a kind of interesting overlap of views, really, between the Apophis serpent, Apep, and stories of magical work done by the goddess Isis. I don't quite know how you resolve that, but it's obviously something that must have occurred to them. Anyway, I've come to the end, really, of the material I wanted to share with you this time about Apep. I think I've mentioned that Apep has no temple in Egypt. There's no surviving temple or cult that seems to survive from before Egypt, where you might say that there was some sort of religion that, because there's a kind of idea that people with a new religion, they turn everybody else's religion into something bad. So there's no real evidence of that. Even so, because you have to add that not having a temple doesn't necessarily mean you didn't have a cult, because the goddess, very powerful goddess, Nuit, or the star goddess, she doesn't have any temples that anybody's found either. She tends to occur in other people's temples, but maybe she's kind of always there as the sky. She so permeates everything, she doesn't need a temple of her own. The other issue we talked about, and we haven't resolved, but at least we've raised it, is there such a thing, or does Apep represent absolute evil? Or is evil one of these strange theological concepts that things are just relative? I discussed quite a long time about how the name Apep, and perhaps the entity itself, emerges in times of particular hardship, really, really hard times for the ancient Egyptians, when they resorted more than before to magic, and perhaps even invented some bits of magic, aspects of magic, in order to protect themselves from the forces of chaos. So maybe this is the origin of the magical religion, which is so distinctive aspect of Egypt. And finally, we talk quite a lot about how the mechanics of magic, what you actually do, was set down during this period. Primarily the use of the wax image spell, but also key magical techniques for all time, really. Things like trampling, burning, binding, enclosing, and of course spitting.